I had a little look up on Stanfords, and you've got amazing history.
Yes, we do. And we've founded in 1853 by Edward Stanford, and his first premises was at 6 to 7 Charing Cross, and that street Charing Cross doesn't exist anymore. So it's more or less there is now Whitehall,
Oh,
but
okay.
exactly where the building is. At some point, they drove a new street from Trafalgar Square down to Embankment, and that's called Northumberland Avenue. And
Oh,
so where the Stanfords was founded, that particular building was torn down to make way for a new street. But anyway, I mean, since 1853, the Stanfords business has moved 6 times, but we've always stayed within Westminster and really very close to where we started. So I think after a few years, the business moved down Charing Cross a little bit. Then the third premises was across the street. Then the fourth home was on Cockspur Street, and you can still see that, and that is a lovely building. And if you go to the south west corner of Trafalgar Square, this beautiful red sandstone building, and you can see on it globes and dividers
Oh,
and that
really?
sort of thing. So if you knew what you were looking for, you'd know, oh gosh, that must have been the Stanfords building.
So when they had that building, did they have that made? Did they have all those?
I believe so.
Right.
Yes, I'm pretty sure they did.
Yeah.
So then in the early 1900s, they bought premises on Long Acre and Floral Street. And I believe that was the print works, and the showroom remained on Cockspur Street. And then at some point they bought 12, 13, 14 Long Acre, and they had the building that stands there now was put together and put up. So that was our 5th home, and we were there for 116 years.
Did they own that then?
Yes, they definitely did.
So what happened?
Well, so Stanford's was an independent business, and indeed founded sort of at the golden era of map making, which is why I think it did very well. In the 1850s and the decades after that, the Victorians were very interested in travel and very interested in exploring the world. And there were some other really important map makers getting started at that time. So Phillips was started in Fleet Street. Bartholomew's in Glasgow was founded a bit earlier, actually, I think in the 1820s. So you got those important map makers, and so Stanford's was the same. They were an important and solid map maker. They were able to afford those kind of premises. Fast forward to the Second World War, and I believe the shares in the company were basically spread across perhaps 3 remaining sort of the eldest sons or grandsons or whatever. And they were all in the army, and none of them wanted to go into the sort of grubby world of commerce, God forbid, you know. So in 1946, they sold the Stanfords business, including that nice building on Long Acre, to the Phillip Group.
That's interesting. Because you know what really interests me, obviously being in print, how they created those maps.
I agree,
It
yes.
was all done, but did they were like engravers or?
No,
How
I
did
would
they
say
do-
they were more like the cartographers.
Yeah.
And so I think I like to think of them more as artists, because there are lots of different ways of drawing maps, and the choices that you make for the colours that you use, and the font for the text, and the hashes, and the little squiggles and all the rest of it, the different symbols. Those are all choices which I think are really very artistic.
Is that back in 1852?
1853 and onward, yes.
So where would they get that information? Someone would be out
Yes.
seeking that information.
Absolutely.
And then bringing it back to you in what format? Just in...
I think a lot was sketches and notes. And so if you go back, I was actually at the Royal Geographical Society yesterday, and I'm trying to get a copy of a map of Crimea, that was created by Stanfords, I think in 1855. But anyway, I did track it down, and so there you have that all that information. Those sketches would have been made by British Army officers, and brought back and then shared with Stanfords. And indeed, I think the description of the map that I was after says something like, based on the sketches of Captain so-and-so or Brigadier such and such or Colonel, what's his name?
Such a long time. Yes,
I mean, you have to remember that those maps created back then were not quite as accurate as the maps we have today, because they weren't using, they were based on sketches, and they weren't using accurate measuring devices, but they were as accurate as they could be at the time.
Yeah. I noticed as well that you were a calligrapher for the Queen.
Oh, yes.
So what would you be creating for the Queen?
Oh, goodness me. I mean, there are... so let's go back to sort of the history of map making. And in fact, this is a good connection with the Mercer's company, who are our landlords.
Right.
And the Mercers, at their livery hall in the City of London, they have an archive, and they have a really good collection of maps in the archive. But their maps are like most early maps, were basically to prove what properties they owned. So a lot of their maps are detailed drawings of the properties along their 6-block estate here in Covent Garden.
Okay.
You know, the land that sits between Long Acre and Upper St Martin Lane and Shelton Street. So they had people out there kind of drawing. So a lot of those are drawings of buildings and yards and all this kind of thing.
I think that's it. Maps are more than just...
Yes, they are. And so, back to the Queen, the royal family owns a lot of property.
Yeah.
And so maps would have been needed basically to record property ownership, and probably weren't really decorative. They were just very businesslike.
Yeah. So the people who were producing the maps, would you say they'd be artists?
Well, they're always called cartographers.
Yeah.
And then, of course, once they've done their cartography, that gets passed on to an engraver.
So the cartography is the one who goes out and looks and...
No, the one who goes out and does the looking is the surveyor.
Okay.
So you've got people surveying, and then you've got... members of the public or members of the British Army making sketches and providing them. So you've got all of that going on. But go back, I mean, I think this ties in with the history of the Ordnance Survey. And the Ordnance Survey is really one of the UK, it's one of the world's preeminent mapping agencies. Yeah. And they used to make them dress up in red uniforms with brass buttons, and I learnt about this last week. So I was hosting a meeting of the International Map Industry Association here in London for the first time. We were lucky enough to meet in the News building, because HarperCollins is part of that organisation, and News International, and they let us use some space for our meeting. Our keynote speaker was Nick Bolton, the CEO. I think his technical title might be Director General of the OS. And he told us some wonderful history about the creation of the OS and how they used to send these chaps out in their uniforms, and they've got lots of old bits of equipment. And Nick says that he's talked to members of the OS, and he says to them things like, well, when did the equipment start changing? I mean, we've been using the same equipment since 17 something or other. And he says he remembers talking to somebody in 1960 or thereabouts, or who joined the OS in 1960. And he said to them, so what was the equipment like in the 1960s? Oh, they said it was basically the same as the 1700s. And then he talked to somebody who joined in the 1970s, asked them the same question. They gave him the same answer.
Really?
So really, it's only been in the last probably 4 decades that the equipment that's used for surveying has changed significantly.
Yeah, and it has changed significantly now.
Now, yes.
That's amazing. What's your organisation do then? What
does Stanfords do?
No, the Map Association.
Oh, the Map Association, the IMIA. We try to connect people who are in the business of mapping. So we're all businesses that are gathering geographical data, mapping data, producing paper and digital maps, and have business opportunities to work together. So there were people assembled there who are gathering data, people who are building paper maps and digital maps, people who are printing maps, and wholesaling products and retailing products. Like, we're a retailer. Stanfords is a retailer. So we belong to the Map Industry Association because we want to meet suppliers and learn about their new products and what are they doing. And wholesalers come because they want to sell to retailers and they want to source their products. So it's understanding the business of mapping.
Because some of these maps can be seriously important, can't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
I
mean, in the world of...
Well, I learnt this last week as well. Nick Bolton told us that Ordnance Survey has just been given the assignment of mapping all of the underground passages, tunnels, resources under London. Right, so there isn't a map or maps of everything under the surface, but soon there will be. And I thought, wow, that's brilliant.
Who goes out and does that?
Well, it's going to be the surveyors from Ordnance Survey. I don't think they wear their red uniforms with their brass buttons anymore. But yes, I think they go out. But I also think that they will probably reach out to other organisations that they know have what is often called base data. So they'll go to Transport for London, they'll go to Thames Water, they'll go to people who might be putting passages and piping and all the, presumably people who put down cable for the World Wide Web, those people, G Networks or whoever, BT. So I imagine that it's a combination of actual surveying using, more sophisticated equipment than they did in the 1700s, and then gathering data from people who already know where some of this underground infrastructure is.
Okay. So back when Stanford started, were they doing maps of even like sea voyages and things like that? Was it mostly land?
It was mostly land. We've got some nice early maps of the principal routes taken by ocean-going vessels around the world. And actually that particular is one of those maps that we've turned into, we have it on a T-shirt and a tote bag and a pencil case, and because it's quite pretty, and it shows you how important the United Kingdom was, with many of these routes emanating from the United Kingdom and going all to different places around the world. Then later on, when we got into the 1900s, Stanfords actually started making their own sea charts, and there were a series of Stanfords charts that were produced, but those are now not in print. So over the years, Stanfords has done some nautical charting, but mostly they've stuck to land-based mapping.
So what was your role when, obviously in the war times, what would Stanfords be doing?
Well, that's a good question. I don't really know because I wasn't around then, but I can point to a couple of things. First of all, my grandfather, Ernest Gordon Godfrey, served in both World Wars, and I've got a great caricature of him in his army uniform walking along with the giant sets of maps, rolls of maps under his arm. And I do know that Stanfords did produce a certain quantity of maps that were restricted. And I know that some of them are in the Churchill war rooms.
Okay.
But I couldn't tell you the full extent of the work because I think some of it was secret. Yes.
Well, it's important because people, also if the enemy get hold of your maps, they know where you are and what you're doing.
Well, and remember, didn't they at some point in the war they would take down the signposts in rural areas and like point them in the wrong direction?
Yeah, they did, because that's how important the mapping was, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Because then otherwise, the enemy get your maps,
get wind of it. Yes, and you'll be a goner.
So what about Stanford then? You probably got maps from all over the world, so people could come and even like in today, you must have maps of
we do, and
Far East and things like that.
I think the thing that's changed is that probably 20-25 years ago, mostly the maps we sold we had in stock and we kept in a map chest or on the shelf, and you'd come in and say, oh, I'm planning to do a walking holiday in Morocco, and I need a couple of maps, and we'd show you them, and you'd choose your map, and off you'd go. Now, a growing proportion of the maps that we sell are print on demand.
Yeah.
So we get a digital image, and we say to the customer, well, so how big do you want it to be? You want it to be a little one on A4.
Yeah.
We can go from A4 to A00. And what's the area of coverage you want? So, okay, you're going to Morocco to do your walking. Where exactly are you going to do your walking? Because then we can make your map centered on where you want.
It'd be so specific
It'd
now.
be so specific,
yeah.
and we'll cover the area you want, and so on and so on. So it also means that we don't have to have money tied up in our stock
Yeah.
that's sitting on the
It
shelf.
makes
So we
complete
just
sense,
print
yeah.
on demand.
Yeah. So what would your clients have been back in the 1800s? Who
Oh,
would be
well,
asking
our
for a
famous
map?
clients, yes. So Florence Nightingale, it was obviously a very famous client. And there's a Florence Nightingale museum just on the south side of the River Thames by the
I
hospital
know
there.
of it, but I haven't
Oh, you
visited
should
it.
go. It's
Yeah.
rather fun. I'm not sure if they have something in there from Stanford's, but we have copies of letters written by Florence Nightingale to Stanford's, ordering maps and then writing back and thanking Stanford's for sending the maps. We have correspondence with Stanley and Livingstone, again, ordering maps and correspondence
What would
going
they
to
be
and fro.
asking for? What sort of maps? And where would you
Well,
have them?
Africa,
No, but I'm saying,
Stanley
where
lives in.
would the information have come for to
Oh,
produce the map?
well, going back to your earlier question about where did the information come from, at that point, it was a bit of a sort of quid pro quo. So maybe Stanley and Livingstone would say to Stanford's, look, we're doing an expedition to this and such place in Africa, and we'll do some sketching and mapping for you. But we also, what have you got available, on the Sudan or whatever? So I think it was a kind of an ecosystem of interested parties. The explorers needed what was already available. Stanford's needed what they were going to go and explore.
Yeah, that was a great time for exploration.
Great time for exploration, yes. Yes, it was.
So you'd have been busy with individuals, really,
Absolutely.
just asking you for that sort of information.
And the army, I think. When the army went off somewhere, I think Stanford's would try and work closely with them.
What I find amazing is how they would produce the people who went out and done the surveying. Like the mountains, the lakes.
Yes, but of course the equipment was getting a little bit more sophisticated, but so they were needing to measure distances, needing to measure altitude so that they could put the contours on the maps. Personally, I think the idea of a contour on a map is brilliant. Who invented that? Before contours, they would sort of draw these little hachures, which, when they were really close together, it meant it was steep. Well, the contour is sort of the same principle, but a lot more mathematically precise. So, the contour line joins the points of equal altitude together. And then when they're very close together, it means it's very steep. And when they're far apart, it means that it's not as steep. But that's one of the first things that you learn when you learn to read a map.
Yeah. You don't think about flat Earth. You don't think the Earth's flat.
No, I'm not a flat earther. Are you a flat earther?
No, obviously not. I said, but there's not many maps done for that, is there?
Well, I also think that once NASA started sending people into outer space and going to the moon. By the way, if you've not seen it, I've just seen a new film called Fly Me to the Moon.
No.
It's brilliant. It's kind of a romantic comedy, but it's based on something in fact, which I won't tell you about because it'll spoil the film. But you should see it.
So we've got rid of the flat Earth theory.
Well, we're right, but so think about it. That we now have from those astronauts gorgeous.
Obviously, we've got
pictures,
some lovely stuff.
Taken from the moon or near the moon, and it shows the Earth in all its glory. And I suppose the flat earthers simply say, "Oh, well, it's a fake." They can't have done that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But no, that's it. So going forward now, the mapping's changing. So obviously, we have got now satellites and all this. How's that changed your business?
Well, first of all, Stanford's sells both digital maps and printed maps. And they're not all printed on paper. So, there are few suppliers who print their maps on, towels and fabric and canvas and things.
Yeah.
But we have, in Manchester, we have our Stanfords for Business division. And 99% of what they sell is digital maps for people mostly wanting to do planning applications. So you could be a homeowner and you're going to, you want to build something on your property, and so you need to put in a planning application. Or you might be a telecoms company and you've got to make sure you know where your towers are. Or maybe you have a estate of pubs and you need to keep track. We actually sell a lot of products and services to housing associations. And that's because there's regulations about keeping track of all your assets. So you need to know, for example, on all of my properties, where are all my lifts and how often do they get serviced, and when was the lift in this building last serviced. And we can sell you a mapping application to keep track of all that. So that's people don't think of Stanfords doing that sort of thing.
I was going to say, so there must have been a real big change from Stanfords being known, or still known really, as maps, Ordnance Survey, World Maps. This is a completely different area.
It is, and we want people to know that we can help them with, quite complicated projects that involve keeping track in a geographic way, in a mapping way of their assets. That's one of the primary services that we sell. So that's a good business. Occasionally, customers ask us to print their digital map, but most of it is used digitally. So that's in Manchester. And then here in London, we are really selling mostly printed product. That's what people come to Stanfords for. And then again, our newest sort of division in Southampton, Book Harbour, they sell everything for the ocean. So they're selling nautical charts and nautical books, and they sell a mixture of paper products and digital charts.
From a business aspect now, because obviously you're now the CEO, when you come into the business, where did you feel you had, because it's your job to make changes, because obviously there was, like you say, the pandemic and things like that, made massive changes. So you've come in and you've had to quite remodel Stanfords. So now how did that come about, and where did your decisions make to go into different areas?
Well, it really came about because of the pandemic. When March 2020, the government said, all non-essential retail shops need to close and nobody can travel anywhere. You can't even go outside the house, unless you're going to buy some food or get your prescription. That caused a massive sort of horrible problem for us. So our sales plummeted by 95%. We managed to hang on by the skin of our teeth. And so that, I think, made it clear to me and the other members of the board and other shareholders that we had to diversify. We couldn't be so reliant on maps and travel. So our first main diversification came in February 2022, so nearly 2 years after the pandemic hit, and we were still suffering from the fact that people were still not really travelling very much. We had the opportunity to buy this maritime business, Book Harbour, and I knew that the maritime business had not been affected nearly as much as the land-based mapping business. So that made sense. In fact, if you think about it, COVID, people were all nervous about gathering together in closed spaces. The thing about being on your boat is, you're out in the fresh air and you're not all going to be breathing on each other. So it's done quite well, actually, the whole marine sector. So that business we bought, and that's doing well.
Where did that come from? What that business?
It came from a very, very big company called One Ocean, at the time based in Enfield, and they were actually planning to sell themselves, and they knew that for any kind of prospective buyer, having this little bump on a log or a little barnacle, this little Book Harbour business was not part of the core, and it'd probably be better if they just sold it off and found a better home for it. So we took on all the staff, And then we hired a couple of extra people, but basically the staff who joined us then are
Still with you.
still with us. And we're expanding and taking on, more things, so that's good. Then actually also in 2022, we had the opportunity to open a general bookshop that we decided to call Battersea Bookshop in the Battersea Power Station.
Oh, that's
And
good.
we're very happy that people know that it's part of the Stanfords Group, but it's not a Stanfords map shop. It's Battersea Bookshop and Neighbourhood Bookshop, and it sells...
It's completely different.
It's completely different. It sells all manner of
That's quite a
books.
brave thing to do.
It was essential. It's all part of this idea of let's not be completely reliant on maps and travel. Let's sell other things. And, the best-selling books in Battersea are, number 1, adult fiction, number 2, any type of children's book.
Did you get full support when you were doing all these changes?
Yes.
You did?
Yes, absolutely. And, I can't thank our landlords enough because they've supported us as well and allowed us to continue trading even when it's been very, very difficult.
Yeah. So
and Battersea have helped us, so that's
a good location.
It is a good location. It's finally, I think, hitting its stride. It's coming up to the third year anniversary of opening in October of this year, and nearly all the spaces are occupied. There's the odd empty one, but it's virtually fully occupied. They're doing great marketing, and it's good. There's a real buzz now.
So where do you feel you're going to take it now, Vivien?
Well, we will continue to diversify. And by that, I don't just mean opening another bookshop, but a good example might be we're working very hard right now to digitize copies of old Stanford's maps that we think people would like to buy and frame and put on their wall. So we're finding more of those. We're getting our collection at the Royal Geographical Society digitized, and then you would be able to buy one.
Will they be bespoke to you?
They will be, yes. And so where did you grow up? Pimlico. Okay, so let's say you would like really nice map of Pimlico from some earlier period. So and you've got a space on your wall that's sort of A3 size, or maybe it's bigger, maybe it's A2 size. So you call up Stanford's, or you walk over to the shop and you pop in and you see Martin, who you know, and you say, Martin, I want I'd like, what have you got for Pimlico that's old and nice looking? And he'll say, look, here's I've got this one, and how big do you want it? And I assume you want it colour, or do you want it black and white? And we print it out for you.
That's a great idea. I think it's a good idea. Will you offer a framing service?
I would love to, but we don't have the wherewithal right now. We need to get that figured out.
Well, that's. Was this something you come up with, or the board you sat there?
No, it's actually more comes from the staff. I mean, really, the people like Martin and Emma and Daniel and so on who
they
are
take
working
on board what people are saying.
Yes, they take on board what people are
interest.
saying. Exactly, and they're listening to what the customer wants.
That's good. So you're listening to your staff,
hopefully,
to see and how you progress, because they're listening to the customers, which is really important.
Exactly.
Really important.
Yes, exactly.
So you've got some plans for the future, obviously.
We do, yes, but essentially it's all about diversification.
Yeah.
Continue to look for opportunities to sell products that people want, and that are unique if we can, because unique is good.
So before you took over as CEO, who was doing it before you?
Wonderful man. His name was Tony Marr. Tony comes from a great book-selling background, and unfortunately, dreadfully, 7 years ago, Tony suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, which rendered him not able to walk or write or talk. And I just had to take over.
So you took over. What was you doing before you took over?
I was working with my husband, running a maritime navigation business in the United States.
Oh, wow. Are you based in America?
I am much of the time, although we sold that business in 2024, so my hope is to be here more.
Right, that's interesting. No, it's interesting what you made that decision to come and take over.
Yes.
But it's your family line, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And it felt like it was the right moment. I felt, okay, I think I've got some ideas
Yeah.
of what we need to be doing. Well, and then, of course, the pandemic hit and
Yeah.
the
Well,
rest is history.
in some ways, you got through that challenge,
Yes,
which is probably a really big challenge. And now, are you enjoying it?
I am. I mean, I probably, um, my worst habit is sort of taking on too much and taking on the next idea. And, maybe I should stay a bit more focused. But it does make one's life more interesting when you've got lots of projects on the go, because they're not all going to work.
Oh,
And so,
no.
I guess my theory is that if I'm working on 3 or 4 things at the same time, probably a couple of them aren't going to work out. And
What do you
then
think your best decision has been so far?
I think the best decision was to buy the business in Southampton, because that, and
Give a
also
lift.
not to spin off the Stanfords for Business in Manchester, which was an idea we had a few years ago, and that would have been very bad, because it's got opportunity and we can connect more with what we do in London. So that's actually a future opportunity. We have some ideas of things we can do.
What did your husband do when you decided to?
Well, he's never lived outside the United States, so for him, he sees it as a great opportunity to spend more time in London and in Europe. And so he's a New Englander. He grew up just outside Boston, and he loves being here. Because, London, what's not to like about London?
Yeah,
And
no,
there's
no.
so many interesting things to do. So he is now retired, and he's absolutely loving being here and exploring things. And that
So you're still going backwards and forwards?
yes, just not as much.
Yeah. So you think long time you might be here?
Maybe, yes. We haven't got
You'll
that
always have a
far.
home in America,
Yeah,
though.
well, I think so. I think always see having somewhere here and somewhere there.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming in. Really,
Oh,
really
hey.
enjoyed it.
Yes.
And the history's
And I
amazing.
found out more about you as well. Pimlico. Perhaps we can find a map for you.
Yeah, maybe that'd be nice. But no, it's really good. Maybe I can get you back at some time. Tell us just how you progressing. So I know you're going to be doing more things.
Yes.
And I know it's going
Yep.
to be progressive.
Well, I'd love to tell you more about the things that we're going to try and do with Ordnance Survey,
Yeah.
because that's quite interesting, I think.
Yeah. Well, no, that'd be great. I mean, we can get that and we can do that and we'll see, because I think people need to see all that and they need to know what you're doing.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
I didn't know half of the things that you're doing,
Yes.
especially about the housing and the associations. And,
Yes,
there's a lot of people out there need to understand that.
there are.
Because I totally thought, I was here today and I was thinking we were just going to talk about the old maps and what we were doing.
Yes.
But I realise now that there's so much more to
There's
it.
so much more. Yes.
And how
Yeah.
people perceive a map.
Yes, and I think there are lots and lots of online tools, many of which are free. I think the tools are better if you pay for them, but there are lots of free ones that allows almost anyone to make a map. And in a way, I think we're almost going back to 1853 and the fact that map making is for artists. And there are just some gorgeous maps being made by people. And maybe I should give a plug for the British Cartographic Society runs a series of map competitions every year. And one of them is the Stanfords Award for Best Printed Map. And that's open right now. And I think the entries close at the end of June. And we want people to, even if you're an amateur and you've made a map that can be printed,
Take part,
part. Yes,
yeah.
go to the BCS, British Cartographic Society website, find the awards page, and you can enter your map.
Right, that's fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you again.
Good, thank
And
you.
I'll have a lot more questions for you next time. Now I know
Okay.
you do all the things you do.
That's
so I've
very
really
good.
enjoyed it.
Loved it.
Thanks very
Thank
much
you.
for coming, Vivien.
You're welcome.
Hopefully I'll see you again soon.
Yes, bye-bye.
Thanks.